I sent one email. One single email that brought down a $40 million company's reputation, destroyed 3 careers, and somehow made me the villain in a story where I was just trying to survive. But here's the thing nobody talks about. I'd do it again. You know that feeling when you realize your entire professional life has been built on lies? When the person you trusted most, the one who promised to mentor you, to help you climb that corporate ladder, turns out to be nothing more than a predator in an expensive suit. That's where this story begins. With me, 26 years old, sitting in a bathroom stall at Morrison & Associates, holding my phone with shaking hands, staring at text messages that would change everything. Let me take you back to the beginning. 3 years ago, I was Hannah Rodriguez, fresh out of college, desperate for my first real job. Morrison & Associates was this prestigious marketing firm in downtown Chicago. Glass towers, marble lobbies, the kind of place where everyone wore designer clothes and spoke in corporate buzzwords. I was thrilled when they offered me a junior account coordinator position. Thrilled and terrified. My first day, I met David Morrison. Not the founder, that was his father, but the executive vice president. 42 years old, silver at his temples, the kind of man who commanded a room just by walking into it. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only person in the world when he spoke to you. His eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled, and that smile. God, that smile could make you forget your own name. Hannah, he said, shaking my hand that first day. I've heard great things about you. I think you're going to do very well here. I was starstruck. This was David Morrison, the man who'd landed accounts with 3 Fortune 500 companies, who'd been featured on the cover of Marketing Today magazine. And he knew my name. Within 6 months, he'd taken me under his wing. Started inviting me to client meetings, asking for my input on campaigns. Other junior employees looked at me with envy. You're so lucky, they'd whisper. David Morrison is grooming you for success. Grooming. If only I'd paid attention to that word choice. He'd text me at odd hours. Great work on the Henderson presentation. You're going places, Hannah. Or, staying late again. You're so dedicated. That's what separates the good from the great. I saved every message. Printed them out and kept them in a folder at home. Proof that I was special, that I was chosen. How pathetic is that? The late nights started innocent enough. Hannah, can you stay behind? I want to go over the quarterly projections with you. We'd sit in his corner office, the city lights twinkling below us, and he'd teach me about client psychology, about reading between the lines in contracts. Sometimes he'd order Chinese food, and we'd eat while discussing strategy. I felt so adult, so professional. Then came the compliments. You look beautiful today, Hannah. That color really suits you. Or, has anyone ever told you that you have incredible eyes? I should have seen the red flags. Should have noticed how he'd stand just a little too close when reviewing documents, how his hand would linger on my shoulder when he passed my desk. But I was 23, naive, and desperate to prove myself in a world that felt impossibly competitive. The first time he kissed me, I was so shocked I just stood there. We were in his office, it was past 9 p.m., and he'd just told me I was getting promoted to senior account coordinator. I was ecstatic, practically bouncing in my chair, when he came around the desk and pulled me up. You deserve this, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. You've worked so hard. And then his lips were on mine. I pushed him away, stammering something about this being inappropriate, about him being married. He just smiled that devastating smile and said, Hannah, what happens between us is nobody's business but ours. We're both adults here. But I wasn't an adult. Not really. I was a kid playing dress-up in a grown-up world, and he knew it. The affair lasted 18 months. 18 months of stolen moments in his office, weekend trips disguised as business conferences, lies I told myself about how this was different, how this was love. He'd tell me about his marriage, how cold his wife had become, how they were basically roommates at this point. "I'm only staying for the kids," he'd say, stroking my hair as we lay in some anonymous hotel room. But once they're older. The promotion came with a catch. I had to keep quiet about us. "People wouldn't understand," David explained. "They'd think I was playing favorites. It would undermine everything you've accomplished." So I kept quiet. Smiled and nodded when colleagues made jokes about how I was David's pet project. Pretended it didn't hurt when I saw him at company events with his wife, a stunning blonde woman who looked at him like he hung the moon. But the worst part? The absolute worst part was watching him do the same thing to my best friend. Sarah Chin joined the company about a year into my relationship with David. She was everything I wasn't: confident, outspoken, the kind of woman who could walk into a room and immediately command attention. We clicked instantly. She was the first real friend I'd made at Morrison & Associates, maybe the first real friend I'd had since college. Sarah was assigned to the same accounts as me, and we made a great team. She had this incredible ability to read clients, to know exactly what they wanted before they even knew it themselves. Within 6 months, she was David's new favorite. I watched it happen all over again. The late nights, the special attention, the way his eyes would light up when she walked into a room. But this time, I wasn't the naive girl being seduced. I was the woman being replaced. The first time I saw them together, really together, I was coming back from the bathroom around 8 p.m. Most of the office was empty, but I could see light coming from the conference room. I peeked through the glass partition and there they were. David had Sarah pressed against the wall, his hands in her hair, her legs wrapped around his waist. I stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds, watching the man I thought I loved with my best friend. The man who'd promised me a future, who'd told me I was special, doing the exact same things to someone else. That night, I went home and cried until I had no tears left. Then I got angry. Really, truly angry for the first time in my life. I started paying attention. Started noticing things I'd been too blind to see before. The way David would schedule Sarah for the same out-of-town meetings he used to schedule me for. The way he'd find excuses to touch her during presentations. The way she'd started wearing more expensive clothes that looked suspiciously like things his wife might wear. And Sarah started pulling away from me. Our lunch dates became less frequent. She'd make excuses when I suggested after-work drinks. When I asked if everything was okay, she'd just smile and say she was busy with a big project. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. I was working late, trying to finish a proposal for a client presentation the next day, when I heard voices from David's office. I recognized Sarah's laugh, that bright, infectious sound that had made me want to be her friend in the first place. I crept closer to his door, which was slightly ajar. What I heard made my blood run cold. "She's becoming a problem," David was saying. "Hannah. She's been asking too many questions, getting too clingy. I think she suspects something." "What are you going to do?" Sarah's voice was soft, concerned. "I'm going to have to let her go. Find some excuse. Maybe say her performance has been slipping." Sarah was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's been such a good friend to me. I feel terrible about this." "Business is business, sweetheart. She'll land on her feet. She's smart enough." That's when I realized the truth. I wasn't just being replaced romantically. I was being eliminated professionally. David was going to destroy my career to protect his secret with Sarah. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. I gathered my things and left the office, but I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner and sat in a corner booth, nursing coffee and planning my next move. Here's what nobody tells you about betrayal: it's not just the big moment when your world collapses. It's all the little moments leading up to it, all the times you ignored your instincts, all the times you chose to believe the lies because the truth was too painful to accept. I thought about Sarah, about how she'd comforted me through my breakup with my college boyfriend, how she'd been there when my grandmother passed away. I thought about David, about how he'd made me feel special, chosen, loved. And I thought about how they'd both been willing to destroy me to protect themselves. That's when I made my decision. If they wanted to play games, I'd play games. But I'd play to win. I spent the next week gathering evidence. Screenshots of text messages, printed emails, photos of David and Sarah together that I'd taken with my phone. I even recorded one of their conversations using an app on my phone, though I wasn't sure if that was legal. The plan was simple. I'd confront them both, tell them I knew about their affair, and threaten to expose them unless David backed off his plan to fire me. It was blackmail, pure and simple, but I was past caring about morality. They'd crossed that line first. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. I was in the bathroom the following Monday, touching up my lipstick before the all-hands meeting, when I heard two women from accounting talking in the stalls. "Did you hear about the Morrison scandal?" one of them was saying. My blood turned to ice. Had someone else found out about David and Sarah? "What scandal?" the other woman asked. "David Morrison's wife filed for divorce last week. Apparently, she found out he's been having affairs with multiple employees. She's taking him for everything he's worth." The first woman laughed. "About time. Everyone knew he was a creep. I heard he's been doing this for years." "Multiple employees?" the second woman asked. "Who else?" "I don't know details, but my friend in HR said there were at least 3 others before the current one. Apparently, his wife hired a private investigator." I stood there, gripping the sink as the full picture came into focus. I wasn't special. Sarah wasn't special. We were just the latest in a long line of women David had manipulated and discarded. And now his wife knew everything. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront David and Sarah privately. I wasn't going to blackmail them. I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of man David Morrison was. I went back to my desk and opened my laptop. The all-hands meeting was in 30 minutes. Everyone in the company would be there, including David, Sarah, and the entire executive team. But more importantly, everyone would be checking their email right before the meeting. I opened my email client and started typing. The subject line read, "The truth about David Morrison, a warning to all female employees." I wrote about everything. The grooming, the manipulation, the promises of career advancement in exchange for sexual favors. I included screenshots of text messages, photos of David and Sarah together, and a detailed timeline of how he'd operated. I wrote about how he'd done this to other women before us, how he was planning to fire me to cover up his affair with Sarah. But here's the thing I'm most proud of, I didn't write it out of spite. I wrote it out of love. Love for the young women who would come after me, who deserved to know what they were walking into. Love for my former naive self, who deserved better than to be used and discarded. The email was 15 pages long. I proofread it 3 times, made sure every fact was accurate, every screenshot was clear. Then I selected the company-wide distribution list and hit send. The response was immediate. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with notifications. Slack messages, text messages, phone calls. I ignored them all and walked to the conference room for the all-hands meeting. The energy in the room was electric. People were whispering, showing each other their phones, stealing glances at David and Sarah. David stood at the front of the room, his face pale, his hands shaking as he tried to organize his papers. Sarah sat in the back, tears streaming down her face. David cleared his throat. I think we need to postpone today's meeting. There's been a situation that needs to be addressed." That's when I stood up. Every head in the room turned to look at me. I could feel their eyes, their judgment, their curiosity. Some looked at me with pity, others with admiration. A few looked at me like I was a monster. "No," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. I think we should have this meeting. I think everyone deserves to hear the truth. David's face went from pale to red. Hannah, this is not the time or place for. When is the time, David? I interrupted. When you fire me to cover up your affair? When you move on to the next young woman who doesn't know any better? When is the right time to hold you accountable? The room was dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. David looked around desperately, probably hoping someone would come to his defense. No one did. Security, he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Please escort Miss Rodriguez from the building. But before security could move, the conference room door opened. In walked Mrs. Morrison, David's wife. She was even more beautiful in person than in the photos I'd seen, but there was a hardness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. Actually, she said, her voice calm and controlled, I think Miss Rodriguez should stay. After all, she's the only one in this room who's been telling the truth. What happened next was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed. Mrs. Morrison walked to the front of the room and stood next to her husband. She looked out at all the employees, these people who had respected and feared David Morrison, and she smiled. I want to thank Miss Rodriguez, she said, for having the courage to do what I should have done years ago. For speaking up when everyone else stayed silent. For protecting other women from my husband's predatory behavior. She turned to David, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. You're finished here. The board met this morning and voted unanimously to terminate your employment. Security will escort you from the building. Then she looked at Sarah, who was still crying in the back of the room. As for you, Miss Chen, you're also terminated. Not because you were a victim, but because you were willing to participate in destroying another woman's career to protect your own interests. The room erupted. People were talking, shouting, some were applauding. It was chaos, but it was the kind of chaos that comes with justice finally being served. I sat down in my chair, feeling suddenly exhausted. It was over. David was gone, Sarah was gone, and somehow, I was still here. But that wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. Within hours, my email had been forwarded beyond the company. Someone had shared it on LinkedIn, and it went viral. News outlets picked up the story. Marketing executive exposed in company-wide email scandal was the headline in the Chicago Tribune. Woman's brave email exposes predatory boss was the title of the article in Forbes. I became the face of workplace harassment survivors. I was invited to speak at conferences, to share my story on podcasts, to write articles about toxic workplace culture. But I also became a target. People called me vindictive, said I was just a scorned woman seeking revenge. The comments on social media were brutal. Sarah tried to reach out to me once, about a month after everything happened. She sent me a long email, apologizing for her role in what happened, explaining how David had manipulated her just like he'd manipulated me. She said she understood if I couldn't forgive her, but she hoped someday we could find a way to move forward. I read the email 3 times before deleting it. I wasn't ready to forgive. Maybe I never would be. David's career was over. No major company would touch him after the scandal. I heard through the grapevine that he was working as a consultant for small businesses, making a fraction of what he used to make. His wife took him for everything in the divorce, just like the women in the bathroom had predicted. As for me, I found a new job within 2 months. A smaller firm, but one with a strong commitment to ethical business practices. They hired me partly because of my experience, but mostly because of my story. They wanted someone who would speak up when things went wrong. I'm 31 now, 5 years removed from that day in the conference room. I'm a vice president at my company, and I mentor young women who are just starting their careers. I tell them to trust their instincts, to speak up when something doesn't feel right, to never let anyone make them feel like their career depends on their silence. People ask me if I regret sending that email. If I would do it differently if I had the chance. The answer is no. I don't regret it for a second. Because that email didn't just expose David Morrison's predatory behavior. It exposed a culture that allowed it to flourish. It started conversations that needed to be had. It protected women who might have been his next victims. Yes, it destroyed my friendship with Sarah. Yes, it made me a target for people who thought I should have handled it differently. But it also made me stronger. It taught me that sometimes, the right thing to do is also the hardest thing to do. And here's what I learned: your reputation isn't built on staying silent. It's built on speaking up when it matters most. The email that destroyed everything also saved everything. It saved my self-respect, my integrity, and my future. It saved other women from going through what I went through. And ultimately, it saved me from becoming someone I couldn't live with. If you're listening to this and you're in a similar situation, if someone is using their power to manipulate you, to make you feel like you have no choice but to stay silent, please know that you do have a choice. You have a voice. And sometimes, that voice is the most powerful weapon you have. Use it. The world needs to hear what you have to say. What's your story? Have you ever had to make a choice between staying silent and speaking up? Share your experience in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more real stories that matter.